Good morning. Greetings to listeners, to viewers. I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about an extremely important subject. We all know that AI is around us. Literally every conference, every seminar, every webinar I attend, the buzzword is AI. Okay, so now that the slide deck is up, as I was saying, the goal in today's webinar is to talk about AI from a substantive standpoint. I will try to stay away from jargons and speak in as simple a lingo as possible, because that's the problem in the field. The important messages often get shrouded, often get masked by numerous terms and terminologies. And I'm a firm believer that if we have to make progress as a society, as a global community, in securing our organizations, in securing our personal assets, in securing ourselves, we have to get past the jargons. We have to understand what the issues are and what can we do about it. So that's going to be my attempt, my goal during this talk. As the host introduced me, I'm Professor Dave Chatterjee. I'm an Adjunct Associate Professor at Duke University. I have been in the cybersecurity world for over 2 decades now, conducting research, authoring papers, and playing a variety of roles. However, the overall goal is to do my part to try and make the world a safer place. Real quick brief about my professional highlights. As I was mentioning, I'm honored and fortunate, I'll say, to have published in the top academic and practitioner journals. I get to speak and moderate at major conferences. I love engaging with practitioners. That's really the excitement that I've always wanted, because they are the ones who are out in the field doing the work, and I try to do my best to support them. I've served in a cybersecurity leadership capacity, served on CISO SWAT teams. And then once again, as the introducer mentioned, I have developed an empirically validated holistic governance framework called the Commitment, Preparedness, Discipline, or CPD framework. And I'll be talking more about that as we go along during this presentation. I've also had the pleasure of producing and hosting the Cybersecurity Readiness podcast series, which recently published its 100th episode, and it has been downloaded in over 117 countries. It's been a great resource, and I hope you will consider subscribing. It's a free resource. And last but not the least, I'm the author of 2 books. As you see in this slide deck, the first book, which was published in 2021, was meant for practitioners, and this is where I talk about how to create and sustain a high-performance information security culture. On the extreme right is the newly published cybercrime-themed tech thriller, The Deepfake Conspiracy. And this is where I attempt to reach a much wider audience and share the challenges and success factors of dealing with AI-related threats, but in a storytelling fashion. I hope you will consider reading these books, and I hope you'll find value in them. And as I mentioned earlier, the podcast series is available. You can go to the portal, sign up. It's available through all the major podcasting platforms. And finally, I wanted to reference 2 recent events that I moderated. The first one was a CISO Executive Roundtable, where we talked about unlocking digital trust, the power of collaboration across security functions. And the second one was a breakfast panel where we talked about how do you integrate AI into cyber resiliency. The reason I thought of highlighting these 2 events is I'm going to be sharing some of the best practices that came from this discussion, and that will reinforce some of the key messages that I'm about to deliver. So the agenda is as follows. I'll briefly review the expanding AI attack surface. Then I'll move on to talking about the proactive defense mechanisms available to organizations. This is where I'll apply the CPD framework lens. Then we'll talk about recommendations and best practices, and I'll close out with some key takeaways. There will be time for Q&As, and in case we run out of time where I'm not being able to take more than a few questions, I will make myself available offline to address any questions or queries that you may have. So let's get going here. This is a disclaimer that every effort is being made to provide information as authentically as possible, though there are no guarantees. So take it as you see it for whatever it's worth. Well, so what's going on with AI-enabled threats? As you can see from this inverse pyramid, it illustrates how the AI ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning lifecycle, creates an expanding and multi-layered attack surface, moving from foundational data layers up through user interfaces. So what's the point here? The point is the vulnerabilities introduced at lower layers can propagate upwards, amplifying enterprise exposure. In other words, the key message here is that AI security must be addressed holistically across the entire pipeline. So as you can imagine, it's a very challenging proposition, especially where the threat actors are developing threats in real time, in a matter of, as we speak, they're coming up with new methods. So the speed, the scale, the comprehensiveness in which these different threat vectors are being developed, that makes defending against these attacks extremely challenging. Here are some examples of the different types of AI-powered attacks, from phishing attacks to malware and evasive attacks, to social engineering, deepfake-based social engineering attacks, AI-driven credential stuffing and brute force attacks, AI-powered botnets and distributed denial of service attacks. These are just representative of the extremely sophisticated attacks that are already happening and are also evolving. Once again, what's the message here? The message here is that the human factor continues to be the most exploited vulnerability. Here's an example where we look at the anatomy of the MGM Resort ransomware attack, which happened in 2023. As you can see from the graphic, the perpetrators learned about how MGM's IT help desk authenticated employees. In other words, they did what we call AI-enhanced reconnaissance. Then they used LLMs to generate flawless and highly contextual scripts. So the interaction with the IT desk is as genuine as possible, as genuine and as natural. They also used AI voice models to clone the voice of MGM employees that they were planning to impersonate. And then the attackers engaged with the help desk and had this conversation where they were responding to the questions being posed, and it seemed just like a regular conversation that any MGM employee would have with the help desk, requesting that their credentials be reset and so on and so forth. And that's how they were able to steal the credentials, get into the system, and the rest is history. The MGM outage lasted 10 plus days, and the financial impact was greater than $100 million. So this is one example of what's going on thanks to, I hate to use the word thanks, but the reality is AI, for all its great things, is presenting us with such challenges. So what's wrong with our traditional detection system. The traditional detection methods are too static to be effective. For instance, the rule and signature-based systems cannot detect AI-generated variants. Gen AI gives attackers infinite options, infinite zero-day variants, and it's very hard to keep up. As I just mentioned in the context of the example, the large language model generated content provides such authenticity that the human recognizable anomalies have disappeared. The attacker now writes better English than many executives. So it's very hard to detect what's fake and what's genuine. And as I said earlier, static anomaly detection fails against the adaptive adversaries as they are constantly adapting to break the barriers and get into the system. Finally, the legacy SOC workflows are not able to keep pace with the automated attacks. Attacks happen faster than analysts can triage, correlate, or escalate. So the challenges are many. So how do we deal with these challenges? I like to approach it from a proactive defense standpoint. More specifically, I use the CPD framework, the Commitment, Preparedness, Discipline, Governance framework, to present the proactive defense measures. Briefly about the framework, this was developed over several years, gathering data, conducting, doing rigorous analysis. And what I ended up getting were 17 success factors, which fell under 3 pillars: the pillar of commitment, the pillar of preparedness, and the pillar of discipline. So essentially the message is, the higher the level of commitment, the higher the level of preparedness, the higher the level of discipline, the better off the company is from a security maturity standpoint. However, that's the easy part. The challenges lie in the detail, and I'll get to them shortly. But let me differentiate the CPD framework from the traditional frameworks that we are familiar with, such as the NIST, the ISO 27000s, and more. Traditional frameworks tell you what controls to implement. CPD guides you to build the environment where those controls succeed consistently. In other words, CPD framework guides an organization to become or to create and sustain a high-performance information security culture. That's essentially what the CPD framework does. And as I said, it comprises of 3 pillars: commitment, which reflects leadership ownership, cultural embedding, and sustained investment. And when I talk about commitment, we're talking about commitment starting from the top and throughout the organization, including commitment from other business partners, vendors, and many other service providers. Preparedness is about operationalizing commitment through planning, architectural guardrails, and shared risk language. Preparedness needs to be thorough, needs to be comprehensive, and needs to go beyond check the box. Mark my words, that's the problem out there. Many organizations are trying to wing it, are trying to somehow check the box, get their certification, and go on and try to get the contract and generate revenue and so on and so forth. That's a short-term approach which is very unstable and can land organizations into huge trouble. So my humble recommendation is, whatever you do, do it very well. Go beyond what is being listed, what is being asked from you. So if you're trying to create a training and awareness program, make it the best in class. if you're trying to empower or hire a CISO, make sure you have the environment in place where the CISO can be truly effective. And finally, we talk about discipline. This is where you are institutionalizing the processes so that the security posture that you want to establish, that you want to sustain, is stable over a period of time. It is not a victim of the fluctuations of the revenue cycle. It is not a victim of the turnover that organizations experience, especially at the leadership level. So what are the recommendations and best practices? Let's start with the first pillar of commitment. First and foremost, we are talking about establishing clear ownership and accountability. Every material AI initiative must have a named executive owner. While the IT department, while the security function will be there in a supportive capacity, business needs to own AI initiatives. The buck stops with the business. Obviously, the buck stops with the CEO, but that's how you have to establish ownership and accountability. This is not something that you outsource. You can outsource at your own peril. Along those lines, AI risk needs to be clearly defined. In fact, let's back up a little bit. The other day I was talking with some clients of mine, and I found that there was a huge disconnect amongst the functional leaders as to what AI means from their perspective and how does that translate into different types of risk, which is completely understandable. However, from a strategic standpoint, from an execution standpoint, from a planning standpoint, there needs to be some consensus. There needs to be shared meaning. There needs to be a common ground. And that's going to happen only through cross-functional involvement, only through cross-functional brainstorming where the leadership is actively engaged. So therefore, AI risks must be clearly defined. We have to go beyond using generic categories, and we have to be more specific in terms of when we are talking about risks. What are we talking about? We're talking about from the standpoint of customer impact, regulatory exposure, and brand reputational risk. So connect the risks to the value propositions of the company. That's how you make the risks more meaningful and more actionable. These risks needs to be embedded into the enterprise risk management dashboards. And this is the way you integrate AI strategy with overall business strategy. AI should never exist in isolation. It should be part of the overall business goals and value propositions. And that's how the company will achieve the right level of strategic alignment. And that translates to more effective security governance. As I mentioned in this slide, the board of directors increasingly expect quantified AI risk exposure. They want to know what are the different types of AI related risks the company faces and what does that mean in specific terms. And that is something that needs to happen. Talking about making the board aware, keeping the board informed, it's very important that the board of directors are educated, are told where the company is from the standpoint of protecting against the different types of AI triggered risks out there, what steps are being taken. In fact, while here I mentioned that one of the best practices is a quarterly AI risk briefings to the board, I would like to urge you to make it real time. Create a dashboard, create a portal where the board of directors can go and see the latest status. of how the company is handling the evolving risks and what steps are being constantly taken to proactively protect the organization, protect its strategic assets, protect its stakeholders. That is the right approach, because that shows true commitment. That shows a substantive effort to go beyond the checkbox. At the end of the day, God forbid, if a company, and this can always happen, or this will happen, despite your best efforts, unfortunately, you get breached. You're being sued. You're in front of the judge and the jury. Let's say you're being accused of gross negligence. This is where you will have to provide documents, provide evidence that you have been at it substantively, comprehensively. You have made every effort. You've gone above and beyond to secure the organization. And that requires planning. That requires collaboration with the legal team from the get-go, not when things have gone bad. That's too late. Legal must be involved from the get-go and throughout, because that's how they are in the know of things. So when things go bad, when they have to represent the company, they are very informed and they can make a very telling case. It's also important from an ownership and accountability standpoint that there is a clear definition or clear understanding of who has AI override authority. As we all know, technology is great, but technology can fail. AI systems are great, but the decision quality can suffer. Systems might be working, but the data quality is degrading for a variety of reasons, and that is hurting critical decisions. The moment the organization becomes aware of this scenario, there must be somebody who has the authority to immediately stop the system, recalibrate, investigate, fix things before they bring it back to the live environment. So there has to be clear, total clarity of who can override, under what conditions, and the overrides need to be properly logged and reviewed. You must maintain good documentation, not only for future training, but also, as I said earlier, this comes in handy in case you're having to deal with a lawsuit. Now we move on to the second pillar of the CPD framework, which is preparedness. And under preparedness, one overarching theme of secure governance is to create a secure and resilient AI architecture. And one of the fundamental components of a resilient and secure AI architecture is a secure data pipeline. So what does that mean? That means you, as an organization, you have to take every measure. You have to institute every control to ensure that data remains protected, untampered, and trustworthy as it moves through the various stages, right from sourcing to ingestion, processing, model training, inference. And there are many mechanisms out there. I have listed a few, starting with encryption, strong access controls and least privileges, continuous integrity monitoring, tamper-evident logging, isolation between data stages or containment, and more. There are many. But the more important thing is you have to be aware of the various ways that data can get corrupted, and every effort must be made to have checks and balances in place, and you have to constantly review, monitor these checks and balances. One common message that you will probably hear from me as I speak to this topic is you have to be at it. It has to be continuous. It has to be persistent. It has to be comprehensive. It has to be substantive. Along the lines of data quality management, we are also talking about data provenance validation, which means verifying where the data came from, who touched it, and whether it is authentic. And once again, you accomplish that through various mechanisms such as end-to-end data lineage tracking, cryptographic hashes and digital signatures, trusted metadata and timestamps, and last but not the least, third-party source verification. Once again, I have shared some representative mechanisms. It is up to the organization to do the due diligence and have in place the best-in-class practices when it comes to data provenance validation. And then we come to the model, the intelligence behind the AI systems. It is very important that organizations institutionalize a disciplined practice of uniquely tracking every model release along with the data, the code, and the configuration that produced it. It is through disciplined model versioning that the organization creates both auditability and accountability, and which in turn turns AI from a black box into a governed, traceable system. In other words, the big picture is when you are implementing AI in an organization, magic is not happening. You have to get under the hood. You have to try to understand as much as you can. Ask the right questions. You do not have to be an AI expert to be successful. Mark my words. You can hire expertise. Nobody has the entire expertise. So you'll have to hire expertise from different areas or contract with the experts from different areas. However, as a leader, you must have the passion. You must have the commitment. You must be willing to learn, to ask the right questions and keep probing deeper and deeper. So that requires an effort, as opposed to, well, I don't want to handle this. I'm responsible for market share or revenue growth. Let somebody else take care of it. Palming off security, palming off AI comes at a huge cost. You cannot just do that. You have to embrace the challenge, deal with it directly, and integrate the AI strategy into the overall business strategy so it doesn't feel that your efforts are being wasted. I often say in my talks on cybersecurity that look at cybersecurity as a strategic capability, not as a cost of doing business, not as a pain point. Think about developing best-in-class cybersecurity capabilities, which in turn will allow the organization to differentiate itself from its competitors and make it more attractive to customers, more attractive for investors. And that's how you have to look at whether you secure AI-enabled systems or you secure any system. Look at it as a strategic initiative. The third, we're talking about model rollback capability. Organizations must be prepared to rapidly revert production to the last known good model when performance, integrity, or security is in doubt. So we are talking about high level of proactive preparedness. To be well prepared, you have to practice. You have to practice with all intensity, with all seriousness. Whatever you're trying to do, whether you're trying to conduct regular red team exercises for prompt injection attacks, model evasion attacks, data extraction threats, deepfake abuse scenarios, you have to engage in substantive testing. While there's nothing wrong with doing, on the ball, like at a high level, sometimes these testings are done. The right word is not coming to me. It'll probably come to me later, but you get the point. You have to actively simulate. A good example I'm going to share with you. Recently, I was talking to a guest for my podcast, and he was a chief technology officer for a major military operation. And he mentioned that when military personnel are being trained, often live bullets are used for these training exercises. And that really got my attention. That spoke to how serious they are about training, because they recognize that the consequences of errors could be fatal. So therefore, you have to be in your best shape, physically, intellectually, organizationally, to be able to thwart attacks and protect the organization. So therefore, I can't emphasize enough the importance of substantive and real-time testing. Reactive doesn't work. Now also, it's important, once again, we are talking about transparency. Organizations must develop the capability to clearly explain what each model does, what data influences the outcome, and how can the model's algorithm, the model's working, the credibility of the data be defended or be clearly explained to regulators. Organizations must always be prepared for a scenario where the system has either gone wrong or has produced some outcomes which has had very adverse consequences, and now they are having to explain. The question is, can you explain in a convincing, in a compelling, and in a genuine manner? That's also a part of preparedness. Attacks will often originate from vendor sites, and vendors or service providers are an integral part of any organizational initiative these days. So therefore, it goes without saying that vendor management is an extremely important success factor. Whether we are talking about vendor model risk assessments, contractual security requirements review, continuous monitoring of vendor system performance. Once again, these are just representative of numerous steps that need to be taken to constantly provide oversight as far as vendor performance goes, as far as vendors' system performance goes. You cannot just blindly trust. People say trust but verify. I say do not trust, constantly verify until you are satisfied, and again re-verify. So you can assume that I belong to that school of thought of zero trust approach. Well, that's what is required in today's environment. You have to constantly be asking great questions, constantly be looking at things that are not obvious. And that's what it takes to prepare for unexpected threats. And of course, use technology. There are sophisticated technologies that can be leveraged to establish autonomous defense capabilities. We are talking about automated account isolation, automated email quarantine, adaptive access controls, real-time policy adjustments. So I'm all for using technology, don't get me wrong, but automation doesn't imply that you get rid of humans. You have to suitably empower humans so they manage the use of these technologies effectively. I'm a huge believer that mindless use of technology, unfortunately, is quite a common practice. And every organization must sit down and ask themselves the fundamental question, are we making deliberate and mindful use of technology given our goals, given our value propositions, or we are simply buying the technology or subscribing to the technology and doing something with it just to tell the whole world, hey, we are not behind. That's what is called the bandwagon effect. It's been around forever, since the days of the arrival of the internet and the adoption of the internet. And I've seen that track record. Nothing changes. Those are common behaviors driven by competitive pressures. My suggestion would be, think before you adopt. evaluate before you adopt. When you adopt, do it right. Make sure it's the right fit and make sure you are effective in leveraging the technology's capabilities. Now we move on to the final pillar, and that is the pillar of discipline. Oh, by the way, the word I was looking for when I was talking about testing was tabletop exercises. There is nothing wrong with tabletop exercises. They can be quite effective. However, you also need to supplement the tabletop exercises with more advanced form of testing, which could be like a denial of service attack simulation or ransomware attack simulation and others, because you really want to simulate the threat scenarios as realistically as possible. I just had to mention that. Well, now we move on to the third and final anchor or pillar, which is discipline. We're talking about providing continuous oversight and trust validation. What does that translate to when it comes to AI-enabled security best practices? We're talking about continuous drift detection, making sure the model is living up to its expectations and is not drifting away from the right types of outcomes. Prompt injection monitoring, constantly monitor the prompt injections. Conduct audits, and the audits need to be real time. I have a background in audit, and audits have been reactive. That doesn't help. There's value for reactive audit, but when it comes to security, audits must be real time so the organization can immediately get hold or become aware of the vulnerabilities and address them as soon as possible. There cannot be any delay, but speed doesn't mean you're overlooking the important facts and factors. You have to push forward at a fast pace, but it has to be done in a very deliberate manner. Model validation checkpoints need also to be in place. So you're constantly validating the training model. Again, we're talking about a zero trust approach. And finally, last but not the least, independent reviews. And this has to be a continuous process. You can never say that, okay, we have it all set, now we can put it on cruise control and we are good to go. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It is a continuous process. Commitment, preparedness, discipline is at the heart of creating and sustaining a high-performance information security culture. That's what it takes to achieve a high level of maturity and maintain that over a period of time. Even in the context of disciplined approach to security, we're talking about using technology for adaptive defense. We're talking about adaptive self-correcting controls, such as when the machine learning baselines and risk scores update continuously. Policies adjust automatically. And as I have mentioned earlier, we're talking about real-time detection of prompt injections, drift, poisoning, and tampering, and systems learning from anomalies to improve future detection capabilities. In other words, if the adversaries are going to be adaptive in their approach, when you are defending your organization against them, you have to be equally adaptive. Another way of putting it is, you have to deal with complexity with complexity. So if the threats become very sophisticated or have become very sophisticated, the defense mechanisms have to become equally, if not more sophisticated. That's the challenge organizations run into. So, to summarize the key takeaways: clear ownership and accountability at the executive level. Absolutely mission critical. Responsible AI use. As I said earlier, mindless use of technology gets us nowhere. Think what you're doing, how responsible is it, and make sure you have good governance around it. End-to-end data quality management. We cannot afford garbage in, garbage out. So you have to have total focus, total oversight to make sure data quality doesn't suffer at any stage of the AI ML lifecycle. Continuous model quality management, that's the brain of the system. You have to ensure the brain is functioning the way it's meant to function. The outcomes, the inferences are on target. You have to constantly review the quality of the outcome. In other words, the quality of the model that's producing the outcome. Complete transparency. There's no hide and seek here. Be upfront, clearly share with your stakeholders what your strengths are, what are the risks that you are aware of, what are the risks that you may not be aware of, and what are you doing about it. The more upfront you are, the more substantive you are in your approach, the better off you will be in the long run. Continuous oversight and vetting of third-party service providers, another important success factor. And last but not the least, don't forget about humans. Yes, I know we have agentic AI, we have all great things coming. Humans still play an important role, but how and what kind of training is required, those adjustments have to be made. But humans will continue to play an important role, as far as I can see, in the not only the near future, but also in the distant future. So by way of final message, I'll leave you with this. The differentiator, the leader, the exemplar will not be that organization who deploys AI the fastest. It will be that organization who governs it the best. I hope you found some value in my talk, and now I'm happy to open it up to questions. So it depends on what you're testing, right? When you use the word safe, you're like, when you're testing, you don't want to upset any live production environment. So it has to be very specific as to what you're trying to stress test. For instance, if you're trying to stress test if the model is working appropriately, you would not do it in a live setting. You would do it in a kind of a sandbox kind of a setting where you will test it out and you will see what the issues are and why the issues were caused. And once you have found the fix, then you go back and fix it and put it back in the live environment. So it all depends on what you are stress testing, like ransomware attack. How do you stress test ransomware attack? You stress test ransomware attack, like I have done some simulations in my classroom where you get the students playing on different roles. They get a certain scenario, they get a certain amount of time to make some decisions, and then at the end they have to explain why they did what they did, how they negotiated with the ransomware attackers, if they at all negotiated. If they didn't, how did they recover from the ransomware attack? So that's how. So it'll be specific to the nature of the threat, and it has, depending on the nature of the threat, it has to be handled away from live scenarios. And once you have figured it out, then you tweak the production system suitably or modify the control suitably so that you have made the right adjustments. That could be a discussion for about an hour and a half. Blockchains, by the way, blockchains doesn't imply that you have total security, you have total immunity. You don't. Because there are different types of blockchains. There's a public blockchain, there are private blockchains, and there's also the hybrid. Once again, you have to manage the blockchain implementation. You have to provide oversight. The rules of commitment, preparedness, and discipline even applies to blockchain. You have to understand what you are trying to secure, who are the involved stakeholders, how are the accounts being monitored, what's the digital footprint. There are many factors that have to be examined, that have to be reviewed to assess the efficacy and credibility of blockchains. There are a couple of myths out there. Oh, I have a blockchain in place, which means I am totally secure. Not true. Oh, mine is a private blockchain, I'm good. Not true. Blockchains can be compromised, and it has happened in the past. But like I said, that's a full-blown discussion that I'm willing to have with the person who raised the question, maybe offline. It's a recent happening, but that is a reality that will keep happening. Today it's Claude, tomorrow it's who knows what. So what can an organization do? Can an organization anticipate, predict what the next Claude is going to do? The organization has to do the fundamentals of cybersecurity well. It is very important to remind everybody, all concerned, that the fundamentals don't change. Commitment, high level of preparedness, institutionalizing robust processes, they need to be in place. To use simple like patching, good patch management is critical. Continuous monitoring is critical. Sophisticated training that is immersive, that is interactive, that is constantly evolving, that is incremental, that's critical. So you have to constantly update your capabilities so when you deal with Claude-like threats, you are able to offer a good defense. It's very, very difficult to proactively anticipate what Claude is going to do or what another tool is going to do. Like the other day I heard, now that we have Claude, ERP systems are going to go away. And you got to be very careful. People are saying stuff. I would hate to say this, but I will say it. They don't think before they say. Go deep. Understand what the development is, what the implications are, how they impact the different functions before you come up with possible inferences, possible conclusions. Like I said, the devil lies in the detail. So I don't want to make a flippant comment about Claude per se, because it's just happening as we speak. But I would urge the listeners to err on the side of doing the cyber discipline, the cyber hygiene as well as they can and sustain it, because that is their best defense. That is their best offense against Claude and other evolutionary technological threats and benefits. When that question is being posed, I'd like to share with the listener a reality of life, and that is convenience trumps everything. When the internet first came along, there was a Wall Street Journal article which said the internet is a fad because nobody will buy on the internet because it's not safe. Now, when I make this statement now, you all are probably smiling, but that is what the article essentially said. We humans, we love convenience. Convenience trumps everything. So what's my point? Gen AI will be used, should be used. So you're not going to shy away from these technologies. These have got great power, but you have to proactively manage and secure it. In my recent publication, The Deepfake Conspiracy, I use a story to share the challenges of Gen AI, but also the benefits. But then you have to live with both and learn to manage them as best as you can, as opposed to whether we should use Gen AI or not. It's not a question of whether you should. You will not have a choice. You will have to use Gen AI. When you say which AI model is best for penetration testing or cybersecurity assessment, I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but the way I see it is penetration testing is a functionality that has to be continuously practiced at different stages of the AI lifecycle. Now, there are different types of models out there. I don't want to commit to one model over the other. I spoke to the governance model, which is the commitment, preparedness, and discipline framework. And the way I see pen testing or red teaming exercises, these are all different types of defense mechanisms, different types of controls that organizations should continuously execute to stay at a high level of readiness. Is there any one particular model better than the other? I don't think I want to go there. Like I said at the beginning, approach security in a very sincere in a very committed, in a very substantive, and in a very comprehensive manner. Do not outsource security, embrace it, make it part of the overall business strategy, treat it as a strategic capability, and your organization will do great things.